Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar hosted by Crop Consultants Australia. My name's Bill Back, and I'm Director of Crop Consultants Australia and Vice President. And yeah, it's a great association to be a part of. I've always enjoyed the networking opportunities and knowledge share in the association. This is a special webinar targeted at Southern New South Wales and Riverina. Due to COVID, we had to cancel our Griffith workshop, which would have been the platform to present a topic such as this tonight. And it's interestingly, in a broader sense, low micronaire has also been in the Lachlan Valley this year and in some later crops also up in the Namoy Valley. So it is a broad-ranging topic. And also it's a topic that, or an issue that spreads through the supply chain and affects all aspects of the industry. And it's for that reason that we've made this webinar open to the broader industry. I'd like to acknowledge Crop Consultants' corporate partners. They are Adama, Ag Biotech, Agnova, BASF, Bayer, Corteva, FMC, Syngenta, UPL and VicChem. Thanks for your support of the CCA and commitment to the professionalism of agronomists and consultants. So tonight, you can raise your hand at any time, use the chat function to contact the speakers or myself, the host, put your questions up at any time and use the vote up function to prioritise questions that you think are important. We are encouraging chat to be used as part of the process too. Just a reminder also, this webinar is being recorded and this will be made available later on the Crop Consultants website. Just to introduce our guests tonight, I have René van der Sluijs, who is a Principal Consultant with the Textile Technical Services, and he's a fibre quality technical lead for CottonInfo, and he's based in Geelong. And then I also have, joining myself, I have Jon Welsh, who is the Principal Climate Analyst and Economist with Ag Econ, and he's also the Energy and Climate Technical Lead for CottonInfo, and he's based out of Narrabri. And at the end of or towards the end of the webinar, I'll also present some seasonal information about low micronaire as well. So firstly, to kick off, I'd like to hand over to René to share some background to low micronaire. René's set up he hasn't got his video, so you'll hear his voice and you'll see his slides. Thanks, René.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Hopefully that's worked.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. So as you said, Bill, I will sort of endeavour to set the scene for yourself and John to continue with. So what I thought is I'd give a little bit of an overview of micronaire, how it's measured, what the components are, why is it such an important physical fibre property, look a little bit at the classification of micronaire and also the premium and discounts. Look a little bit at the historical data, and here we're looking at the historical data from an Australian perspective, and then we'll sort of dovetail into Southern New South Wales, look at the fibre quality from this season, and then just also talk a little bit about other consequences and the reputational damage that low mic can have. I think how it's measured, I think most of us know that it's measured on the high volume instrument. This is actually a very simple, easy and quick test, which was first came to the fore in the 1950s. So it's been a testing method that's been around for a long time. As I said, it's very simple. So all you do is you take a sample of a specific weight, stick it in a chamber, and then basically push a certain amount of air through it, and then measure the resistance to the air. So if it's a coarse fiber, the air goes through, there's a low resistance to air, so a lot more air goes through, and hence you have a higher micronaire value. And if it's a finer fiber, there's a higher resistance and hence a lower micronaire value. And here we can just see this is sort of, at the moment, it's about 10 grams that you weigh out, you stick into the chamber, you close the door, and off it does, and it does the measurement. So it's a very quick, simple method that's now used. The problem with Micronaire, though, is that Micronaire at the moment Micronaire doesn't have a unit. And the reason for that is that Micronaire is the combination of fineness and maturity. So fineness obviously is the thickness of the fiber, and then the maturity is the degree of cell wall thickening. And so these two components make up Micronaire, which makes it a bit of an interesting beast, because Micronaire can't really distinguish between fine, mature cotton, or can't distinguish it from coarse, immature cotton. And here in the slide, we can just see all the different types of Micronaire, of fibers. Diameters here we can see is a coarse, very coarse, mature fiber. And we're sort of looking more at the ideal sort of fibers over here. We have the finer fibers here, and then we have sort of the immature fibers here where we don't have a big cell wall. So that's really the issues with Micronaire. Unfortunately, Micronaire is a very, because it's been around since the 1950s, it's a value that the spinners really are comfortable with. And here we can see the important fiber properties from a spinning process point of view. You've got the three different spinning systems there, the ring spinning system, the rotor spinning system, and the air jet. And we can see here in all three of them, fineness plays a very important role. They refer to it as fineness, but obviously it's Micronaire. And then obviously there's other fiber properties as well, which are important, like stickiness, contamination, net content, seed coat fragments, etc., etc. Obviously grade, color as well. So why is it important? Well, it's very important. Here we have a microscopic view of a yarn. You can see that the yarn is made up of a number of fibers in the cross section. And here we can see in the cross section of a yarn all the different types of fibers that make up this yarn. So the number of fibers in this cross section is very, very important, because that will determine the type of yarn that you can produce, and also the quality of the yarn. Another aspect, of course, is that immature cotton doesn't dye to the same shade or to the same depth as, for example, a mature cotton. So here we can see a very immature fiber. You can see this color is very vague and not very well, and not very dark. And then we can see as the maturity ratio becomes more, it becomes very fine and even. Also, Micronaire, apart from the color, Micronaire is the second largest contributor to a price for cotton. It takes up 22% of the price of a cotton, and hence the discounts if you go out of the base grade is so high, because it makes up 22% of the price of the fiber. And here we just look at the spinning limits. So if we look at the ring spun yarn, where most of the Australian cotton is produced, and most of the Australian cotton is sort of produced in this band over here. So sort of between 15 tex to 10 tex. So 15 tex means 15 grams per 1,000 meters. And this is sort of what we're aiming for. So you would have heard before is that although 3.5 to 4.9 is the base grade, 3.8 to 4.2 is referred to as the premium range, because that is really hits the sweet spot and makes sure that you have a fine, mature fiber that can produce these yarns. I mean, obviously, if we could get a low mic cotton, which was fine and mature, that would be great too. But the issues is that normally when you go down this route, generally speaking, yes, the cotton is fine, but generally speaking, it's immature. Not always, but generally speaking, that is the rule. Look at the classification. The G5 range is the base grade. So that's the 4.9 to 3.5. We can see the values in orange above is the G6 and G7, which is the coarse and the very coarse fibers. And then when we go down below to the G4 is the immature, and then it becomes very, very immature. And here we have, I've got this from Cotton Compass, so thanks for them providing that information. And here the average discounts for cotton that goes above. We can see here that the fibers that are coarser, the discounts. So here's the points, and here's the discounts per bale. And we can see in this orange here that the discounts per bale for the coarser fiber is not as much as when we go into the finer side. And as I've explained, the finer cotton is always the issue. And so the discounts on the finer side is always higher than on the coarser side. And I think that's one of the reasons why the varieties bred here in Australia generally tend to be on the top end of the G5 range, and sort of just getting into this range to make sure that we don't get into this region over here. Fiber development, that's before we get into a few more things. I think fiber development, this is a nice little diagram that from Greg Constable and Mark Bange. It just shows that after flowering, for the first sort of 20 days after flowering, is where the lengthening of the fiber takes place. And then for the next 40 days, the thickening of the fiber takes place. And I always remember Mike Bange always saying that, there's over these 40 days, you need consistent issues to have issues with Mike. So if on a 1 day or 2 days there's some issues, the fiber can still recover. Whereas in the length elongation stage, the lengthening stage, you only have 20 days, and something happens during that period, you basically have lost it. So what are the components of Micronaire? Again, this is from Mike Bange and Greg Constable, and they sort of got it in 4-5 different categories of varieties, and you can see most of them are equal. So variety plays a big role, the temperature plays a big role, defoliation plays a big role, boll load, and also stress. So when we talk about this specific pie chart, it's not just about low Micronaire, obviously, but it can also be high Micronaire. If the plant is stressed a lot, that can also cause high Micronaire as well. And this is also a graph again from Mike Bange and Greg Constable, where they were just showing the temperature effect. As the temperature effects go down, and I think that's something that we saw in southern New South Wales this year, the potential for lower mic cottons is there, and I think John will sort of speak a bit to that in his presentation. So this is the historical data from the Australian crop from 2011 to 2019, and we can see the green band is the G5 range, and then the blue band is sort of the top end of the G5. And you can see the majority of the cotton over the years since 2011 has sort of always been in the G5 area, with a small percentage on the G6, so a little bit higher, and a small percentage of cotton down towards the bottom end. So we haven't really seen a lot of low mic cotton produced in Australia over the last 8-9 years. The other thing that we also need to just remember is the reputational damage. Low mic causes neps. So neps can be the size of a pinprick, you can see here, and that's an entanglement of fibers. So immature fibers don't have a lot of strength, and they bend and buckle very easily. And specifically with the big modern ginning plants down in southern New South Wales, they can cause a lot of damage because the fiber is immature. And this is what it sort of looks like on a fabric. It's got these white dots. So if you've got a denim fabric, that's fine. But Australian cotton is used in high-end stuff, so that will cause issues. With that, I'd just like to finish off. Just want to acknowledge the following people and companies that have provided data and information. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'll finish off. Thank you, Will.
Thanks very much for that, René. With the grassroots funding, are you thinking you'll be able to get industry involved with that? How's that going to play out? Well,
we've the CCA has put it into, I think it goes to CLDC. So once we get that, an indication that that's going to improve, then myself and Emma, and I think Karen and probably yourself will see what, and perhaps work with the CCA as well, because you guys are gathering a lot of information, and basically to try and see, in areas where it worked well, where people got little or no discounts, as opposed to areas where it didn't work so well, to try and find out, you know, what happened, and from there on to see if there's any gaps in research that we need to do, and draw up a report which will be delivered to the CGA and obviously CRDC as well.
Okay, no, that sounds good. If anyone does have any questions or any chat, feel free to use the boxes down the bottom of your screen. But thank you very much for that presentation, René, and the background you've given us there. As we all know, climate and the environment which we produce the cotton is a big factor. So I'd like to hand over to Jon Welsh, if you can shed some insight into that part of the puzzle, please. Just might need to unmute. Are you good now?
How's that one?
That's great.
Better? All right. Thank you, Bill, and welcome everyone. Thank you to the CCA, Liesl and Bill for the invitation to come on and discuss potential climate influences on this Micronaire issue. As mentioned, we do have, hopefully, a successful project going through the pipe in CRDC to have a first pass look at this issue, and just hearing the numbers from the discounts, this is certainly substantial in a year like this when everyone's starting to recover to receive those discounts. Is a real issue that I think warrants investigation of depth. So just an agenda for this presentation, the next 15 to 20 minutes, going to have a top-down look at the macro climate drivers and in-crop rainfall influences, and then take a look at early season climate of what we do know and the influences in that first sort of 3 to 4 months at the end of the calendar year, and then sort of go out again and have a look at the IPO, which is the interdecadal Pacific Oscillation, and the 5-year cycles. And to finish off, there is some actual research being done on this issue on using decision support and whether in fact the POEMA model or the climate models can assist in decision making for cutout in cotton. So that was fairly poorly publicised. That came out in 2018 from a co-funded cotton research project through Managing Climate Variability, which is a multi-RDC project. I don't think there was any media done on that, so we'll just step through what that study was about and the findings from it in this process. And then down at the farm level, you know, what are the rules of thumb with what we do know at the moment from this snapshot that I'm giving you, and potential management levers. So, as I mentioned, the top-down macro climate drivers and in-crop rainfall, well, rainfall distribution throughout the year is changing, and there has been a number of studies done to validate this claim. You can see there that the influence of the tropics is actually moving further south, which in turn has had an impact on the traditional, you know, mid-latitudes and Mediterranean regions, such as where you guys are in the MIA. And you can see there the left hand, the seasonal rainfall zones from the 100 years up to the year 2000, and then the influence from 2000 to 2015. And those zones, those colours, have crept further south. You know, so much so that that the winter, slightly winter dominant rainfalls, or not dominant, but slightly winter skewed rainfalls, are now becoming more uniform in distribution. So that's, I think it's worth noting in this when we're talking about influences through the growing season, to be aware of that change. And again, as part of that process, what's sitting in behind that as far as the mechanics of making that happen, the subtropical jet, which is traditionally up at higher latitudes, you know, through the border rivers of region of, you know, New South Wales and Queensland, is actually pushing further south than it has in the past. just depicted there by that diagram. Matthew England from UNSW recently published a paper on that from very detailed research explaining those processes. Some more recently co-funded CRDC research on observed changes in rainfall. Again, a smaller snapshot broken up into groups of years here from mid last century, and then from then up till not too recently, 2013. And what that shows is kind of what we're seeing on the ground. Particularly there, you'll see the Darling Downs region is particularly had a check in rainfall through those periods, and a decline in rainfall in that northern New South Wales, southern Queensland area, highly productive farmland through there. But interestingly, in southern New South Wales, northern Victoria, not a whole lot of change in wet days through the summer or the winter months. Unfortunately, we don't have the autumn and spring graphs here in this particular study. Katerina Waha, the lead researcher on that, is just away at the moment, but they're halfway through a study examining particular cotton areas, 3 in New South Wales and 2 in Queensland, on closer investigation on distribution of wet days. But further to that, what we do see from recent research coming out of ANU is when the systems are coming through and when it's raining, what we're seeing systems not hang around like they used to. So you'll see there the top panel, top left-hand side there, that the trends in the 1 to 2 day events are coming through, have the index or anomaly is showing an increased frequency in those trends to shorter rainfall events. And, if the last 3 to 4 years, we're certainly seeing that in observations on the ground. You'll see systems come through. You may get 50 mils in a fall, which will come and go in 6 or 8 hours, and then the sun will come out again. So that you'll see there in most parts of Central Eastern Australia, the longer events are becoming less frequent, and that's an attachment to that is, the high pressure systems are coming through, they're camping over the top of us, and they're only really moving away out into the Tasman Sea or abating for a short period of time before again they're replaced by another high pressure system. And I'm sure anyone that's a student of the weather, and as most of you would be, just from watching the synoptic chart on the ABC News or wherever, or in the morning on breakfast TV, those big high pressure systems that sit above, Western Victoria or out in the Tasman Sea, particularly during the summer months, and they're only really dislodged for short periods of time, is really depicted in those charts there with an increase in shorter rainfall events. So that won't generally be picked up in most data, where you see basically no change to rainfall quantities throughout on an annual basis. So that won't be captured in broad statistics. That has to be kind of examined in closer detail. So that's a kind of interesting, a little bit counterintuitive to I guess, to this Micronaire issue, where you have cloudy, musty, damp, periods through the late growing season. So it kind of makes me think that, it's a perfect storm of climate influences in the 2019/20 season that we've just gone through. For those Micronaire issues to rear their head, it is a little bit contrary to what we're seeing here in the science. Can we see these wet and cloudy periods coming? Well, the short answer to that is no, not on long lead times, that's for sure. So what this graph shows is a rolling 3-month average starting in January, February, March in the top left-hand side, and then just February, March, April, May, where the 2 arrows are, continuing on in that sequence right through till December, January, February on the bottom box. So what that shows you, where there are no colours, there is nothing statistically significant. And the three different colours down the bottom in the key show the Nino 3 index out in the tropical Pacific Ocean. That's just a grid square measurement of the ocean temperature. Then you've got blue, which is the El Nino Modoki, which is one of my favourites for the central eastern cotton areas, that one of the key drivers that we must watch. That's very favourable at the minute, which is terrific. I'll add that. And Indian Ocean Dipole, which is becoming more of a household name, the red, and the Southern Annular Mode, which is an atmospheric driver, particularly again for central eastern cotton areas, more so in the south and the central areas, and less so in the northern areas outside of that map. And what you see there, and I really like this chart because it explains to people, I guess, why I don't like to see people get misled into taking too much notice of seasonal forecasts. So the 1 to 3 month forecast once per time. I don't publish them in the Cotton E-News because their accuracy is simply not good enough, and I've certainly been burnt a few times with my own decision making and taking too much notice of those. And the science behind that is basically that the climate doesn't have much of an influence. Other factors influence our climate other than those key components that go into the models. Can we predict these in that period? No, we don't have a lot of lead time, and that will play out in the Mike Bange, Peter McIntosh study that I'll show you a little bit later. And that's just a reference quoted there. So if you do have any questions about along the way, there'll be lots of more research come forward. Just type something into the bar and I'll try and answer your question later on. What does all of this mean? Lots of science in there. More summer rain totals for the southern areas of New South Wales. I would expect for that to continue, given the tropical oceans are holding and storing more heat. And we know the atmospheric situation with the jet stream, the tropical jet coming a little bit further south. Well, I guess that's we expect to see some adjustment in the really traditional winter dominant rainfall. So for the most part, the winter rainfall has been reduced in much of southern Australia, mainly due to those high pressure systems. The rain bearing systems that we're getting are moving faster, and the intensity of the rain is becoming higher, which certainly makes no-till systems, brings to the fore ground cover in that respect, and very, very little correlation with our major climatic drivers or influences through that summer and autumn precipitation period there, which is an important point in itself, to try not to get misled by particularly communication coming out of the rural press about La Nina, El Nino cycles post-Christmas. That's really only useful for how the following year may get set up in terms of the bigger picture drivers. Here's something really interesting that we also undertook on a project where we had CSIRO involved. Crop ETO. Now, the reason I've chose this instead of just temperature or just irradiance or just rainfall, for example, is to just show you the geographical distribution of what's driving crop ETO when. And I guess the salient feature here is that the really good, strong relationship we do have with crop ETO, which is plant demand for water essentially, and I guess that underpins your growth stages and how quickly the crops take off in those early spring and early summer periods. If we've got really high crop ETO, that normally means we've got higher demand for irrigation water or plant demand for water due to a number of factors, and it's the old FAO 56 equation, the Penman-Monteith equation, which captures radiation, temperature, wind speed and humidity. And you'll see there I've got the circle around the Griffith area. The Indian Ocean dipole there has a strong connection there in September through to November. So that is when the Indian Ocean dipole is positive, that means you'll get a corresponding increase in ETO during that period. Now that's from observations from last spring, and happy to have some discussion on this. From what Bill was saying, it was a cool start, which is very unusual. We had the strongest Indian Ocean dipole event at the end of last year that we've ever seen, going back to what someone did say 1648 or something, or 1680 something, was the next strongest Indian Ocean dipole on coral records. So we've had this really strong event, but we've had a cool climate condition in southern New South Wales, which is contrary to those numbers, which does sort of point towards a bit of a black swan event in some respects. But before we move off this slide, we've got other influences there which may be useful. I noticed Nick Gillingham was on the webinar as well. So other Pacific Ocean indices take over once you really get further north of the Macquarie Valley. That's about the border of the Indian Ocean influence. And once you start to get into the mid-latitudes, you'll see there a variety of different drivers take over in terms of being the lead indicator of what's influencing crop ETO and early summer growth climate. So managing cotton varieties, IPO stands for Interdecadal Pacific Oscillation, or weather certainly is the home of the acronym, or PDO, which is Pacific Decadal Oscillation, two flavors of the two brands of the one cordial, if you like, and just with the extensive period we've had of really dry deficiencies in rainfall, you'll see there by that right hand map there, and of course we've all lived through it, so not many people can deny those charts there, which are actually calculated on the ENSO cycle, so not your typical calendar year cycle of January to 31 December, but instead 1 April through to 31st of March. So that's captured there in that analysis, just how deficient we have been in 8 years, and it tends to go, and this is really good, if you haven't seen this poster app, it's just fascinating to see the different cycles over time mapped out as per ENSO cycle. And you know, with the La Nina on the cards this calendar year, we could well be flipping out of that dry phase of the positive IPO into a negative or wetter phase, you know, in the coming 5 to 7 years. Here's hoping. So I guess that has implications for you guys in the south with a much, well, not much shorter, but a shorter growing season than further north. And that is, you know, if we do have background wetter conditions, I would be inclined myself to choose a variety that was going to be shorter maturing, rather than the really long season high yielding potential varieties that you know, in those El Nino years that are terrific for irrigation and a long season, where you have terrific irradiance right through the growing season, good heat units. Those long season varieties are going to be spectacular when there's a positive IPO or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And that's a link there, certainly worth clicking on if you haven't seen that before. Those numbers have been updated just in the last few weeks. So a spectacular red showing there through most cotton areas, which I'm sure a testament to what people have lived through. So that's just a kind of broad rule of thumb, anyway, the IPO and how it needs to be considered. Can science help manage the back end? Well, this was an actual 2 or 3 year research project led by Mike Bange, who's obviously a cotton physiologist, and Peter McIntosh, who's an oceanographer, climatologist based in Hope. They had a look at decision support and crop models and how can they be better used or combined to make decisions, you know, to things like crop cutout. So what actually happened, they examined a whole bunch of, well, probably 3 or 4 core aspects of growth cycle in cotton, and the temperature seasonal forecasts early in the growth up to Christmas, sort of mid-January, were found to be quite useful. And that's probably consistent with the correlations that we showed you on that earlier crop ETO slide. I showed the ETO values and correlations with the oceanographers when I did that analysis, and they were pretty much as stunned as I was as to how almost the relationship was. Temperature isn't quite as well correlated as crop ETO, but it just goes to show they're the primary, those connectivities or those connections are the primary inputs to seasonal models, which stands to reason that they were only really most useful early in the season. And then in the back end of the season, the access model and combined with the crop models, and it wasn't a happy ending, utility was low or non-existent, which is kind of what we're seeing. What I'm trying to emphasize here is try not to get too distracted by what the seasonal models are saying, because the accuracy just isn't there. Again, onto the back end, in terms of, okay, we know the bigger climate influences, which I've covered off on the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean. The southern annular mode begins to decay in terms of its relevance or impact on cotton areas, past January as well. So what does influence cotton areas? Well, certainly in cotton areas, we saw a very active Madden-Julian oscillation in phases 5 and 6. And for those of you that don't know how to read that spider diagram there, the MJ, just picture that as looking down on top of the Earth from the top of very top of the globe, and you've got this massive low air pressure rotating around the equator, and you'll see there it's got a bunch of different zones that it goes into, every 15 to sort of 35 days. And when that kicked into gear, when the Indian Ocean dipole positive decayed just after Christmas, New Year, and we started to see some rain around the place, that was very active to the point where it was textbook predictable. And I was sharing this with quite a few of my farmer and agronomist mates, and they said, oh, that was just so uncanny how when the MJO was in our area, it just tended to rain. And certainly that's how it played out. We had the MJO on this 15 to 25 day cycle where whenever it came back into phases 5 and 6, it rained through the mid-latitudes. So that doesn't always play out like that. We did some analysis on it a couple of years ago and its impact on the mid-latitudes. And when the MJO isn't active and just sits inside that circle, which denotes a very weak or indiscernible MJO event or pulse of air pressure, we had really, really hot, severe, horrible dry summers. Good if you're irrigating in the south of the state, but everywhere else they were those years where the MJO wasn't active. We saw really hot, dry summers because the pulse of tropical moisture wasn't coming over our region. So that is one area science can help towards the back end when our climate correlations are very weak or non-existent, is to track the MJO. So just to sum up, what practical implications can we draw from, basically this kind of this analysis that I've just put together tonight or in the last day or so? The IPO state, the wet phase, certainly if the IPO state was in that negative or wetter phase where you do see back-to-back La Niñas potentially, if it was me, I'd be looking for varieties in your region that would be shorter maturing and probably less aggressively chasing top-end target yields. ENSO state, El Nino, we have seen some of those El Nino summers. They don't always correlate well with rainfall, but certainly when you've got an El Nino condition, you've got that, you tend to get more clearer dry weather, as certainly the front end of the season is much warmer and crop ETO is generally higher. Indian Ocean dipole state, well, that's one of the key influences for that southern New South Wales area. The wetter phase, so that will be generally cooler from plant to Christmas until the Indian Ocean dipole decays properly. And then again, so that will slow you up. Your day degrees will generally be down when you see a really wet Indian Ocean phase. Like we're not looking at a strong event, but we're certainly creeping towards thresholds at the moment with that Indian Ocean. And then what I've just covered, the MJO behaviour. When you start to see an active MJO, hindsight's marvellous, of course, but you don't always see that MJO play out where it comes back every 15 to 25 days, and kept raining. I had a look at the Griffith precipitation totals for those 4 months when the MJO was active, and yes, autumn certainly would have been cloudy and wet through much of that period when fibre quality was impacted. There's a little GIF there showing the MJO and cloud patterns. That's not exactly for our summer. That's more of a spring. You'll watch it go into phase 4 and 5. That's just an example of how the MJO works, and that's showing jet stream and cloudiness. But the desktop analysis, I've just got there a couple of bullet points on. If it was me making that decision, based on really broad brush science that we've just gone through, if I think we are into a slightly negative or wet phase IPO, and bearing in mind that's been in a dry phase for a hell of a long time. The ENSO is pushing La Nina thresholds at the moment. It's actually eclipsed La Nina thresholds, but as per the science, it needs to stay there for 3 or 4 months before it's an event. The Indian Ocean state, well, it's sat on the fence for a long time, but there has been a surge of warm water in the eastern pole of the Indian Ocean, so that's creeping into wet phase. And of course, we don't know what the MJO is going to do just yet. It's a little bit too early. It's pretty much a wet season driver from November to April. So that's just a bit of a first glance at just what we've covered, and more so probably my own take on what I know and my very limited understanding of cotton varieties. So wrapping up in discussions, rainfall patterns and distributions, they are changing. You are seeing lots of cotton grown in southern New South Wales that we wouldn't have seen 30 years ago. So we're seeing more often rain in the summer months and more intense falls when they do occur. In 2020 conditions, it does look like an outlier to some degree. How much emphasis we can put on that occurring when we've seen really a black swan Indian Ocean dipole positive or dry phase event, a 1 in 100 year event, flipping into a really active MJO. It sort of makes me wonder, given the research that I'm sort of reading all the time, how often one of those may play out, and probably not that often, I wouldn't have thought. So in defined wet or dry phases, there could be some management, and I'm sure Bill will touch on management in what was a very tough season to grow cotton as far as maturity selection goes. And monitoring the MJO is probably one thing to look out for from January through to April or May when the crop is picked. It was active right through to April and May this year, so certainly worth keeping an eye on again. As mentioned, we do have a syndicate of us having a closer look. There's not huge resources thrown at that mini project, but certainly with the extent of losses, it could certainly pay for itself if there was something to come out of that. That's it from me. A little bit of news there. We are in the process of designing our own e-news service, so I just thought I'd mention that. And to finish off there as an appendice, that's actually a tripole index. That was a research paper written. This is partly how the IPO is measured out of the longer term wet and dry year cycles, as what's going on in those 3 boxes. But I've probably taken up way too much time. So thank you, Bill, and look forward to engaging for questions later on if there are any.
Yeah, I'll just go to one question now, John, from Kieran. Is it possible that more cloudy weather at the start could help stabilise nighttime temperatures at the start of the season?
Absolutely. The blanket layer of cloud early in the season is certainly better than really clear El Nino type skies, Kieran, where you have lots of heat leaving the Earth's surface, leaving to cooler air sort of acting as a sink, and very, very frosty weather. The minimum temperatures are often, records are often set in those El Nino years rather than quite softer years like this where you have a smaller gap between maxima and minima temperatures.
Okay, no, thank you very much for that, John. Much appreciated.
All right, I'll stop sharing now, Bill.
That's okay. Okay, I've just got a short presentation myself. Yeah, just I suppose maybe looking at more of the management side of managing low micronaire. The comment I'd make, I'll give you a brief here, just an overview. I'm going to talk about day degrees and the nodes above white flower decline, some comments on the timing of crop cutout, and I've got a case study of 2 fields at Carrathil that I was involved with, and then also talk about some of the decision making in crop. I didn't want to touch too much on planting and varieties, other than just to say that obviously a 746 or a 748 variety do pose a greater risk varietally due to their later fruiting potential, their ability to have more fruit formed in those cooler periods, and I suppose just their general adaptation and suitability to a long season, which sometimes we don't get in the south. They offer the great yield potential, but yeah, they have inherent micronaire risks. And I think part of planting has you need to have some dates involved, as you know, you might start out with 748 if you can, but then realising, okay, if it's getting towards, you know, the 8th or the 10th of October, it might be the end for that variety, and maybe, you know, a 746 needs to be planted by the middle of October, or and using a 714 if you need to, you know, as a back end season variety. We've also got the 606 coming out as well, which provides a bit more range of which it can be planted. I'll just go to just a slide of day degrees, and this is with reference to Kieran's Southern New South Wales cotton weather spreadsheet. This is just straight day degrees from last year, the season, compared to the average, and it's a cumulative data set. And as you can see, at the beginning of the season, there's a slight dip there in the build of day degrees, where we had conditions go from cool to cold. And then I think at the top end, most people can realise, the season did drop away at the tail end. I think the point there is, I suppose, often when we look at day degrees, we can see this relatively linear graph. It always, you know, reasonably well just keeps going higher, and we can get this thinking that we can just keep stacking the yield for the whole season regardless. And, you know, we track flowering and how long we flower for, and, you know, obviously a metric of yield can be to grow the crop out later, and, you know, every extra bowl accumulated is contributing equally to the yield within that plant. I'll just cross to another slide, and this is exactly the same data set as before, just using the same base 12 day degrees. However, I've just graphed it as snapshot data, so it doesn't accumulate. And I think this, you know, just more graphically represents what we see in the south, obviously, and it's more of a bell curve of heat, if you to put it that way, and it's more then that you see it's not so much, you know, yield isn't accumulated in a linear fashion if it's to follow the heat accumulation of the season. And we can just see, you know, in 2019, there was really quite a stark drop off in temperature at the back end of the season. So if we're looking at ways of really influencing quality and also yield, there has to be so much management and active crop agronomy applied in the middle of the season. And really, if we haven't created that square, by the 20th or the 25th of January, then there's not much we can do to create extra positions that are going to significantly contribute to yield. So we've got to get it right in the middle, and factors like primarily timely crop irrigation are going to be critical in the middle of the season, but obviously also nutrition and pest management as well, to protect the good, the good fruit that can produce the good micronaire in the middle of the season. So I'll just cross over to another slide, and I really like this. It's the nodes above white flower decline, and this is with reference to CSD and their ambassador network. That was in a fax on Friday. And when we're managing a crop, obviously we're managing that nodes above white flower decline. The interesting comment about this graph is it's geographically it covers the whole of the cotton industry, and it covers typically good yielding growers that are in that group. And I just put a mark on there, the cutout there at 1630 day degrees, and if that was to be applied to the season we just had in the south, that would be the 18th of February, which it would have been way too late to then have 4 nodes above white flower. We would have still been flowering, well into March. So really, if we're looking at that nodes above white flower decline in the southern regions, it's potentially got to be in most seasons to the left of that red line. So what I've done is I've just graphed over the top. I'll show some points, the crop I managed and how those data points laid out. And this is just working on an average of planting date, which was the 5th of October. And to reach that same nodes above white flower, it was the 9th of February at 1475 day degrees, which, obviously is a big difference to the average of that ambassador network, and just shows how cool the season was in comparison to the rest of the industry. And if I just go back to the start, 1st of January, tracking pretty well to the line. 7th of January, it's come down a bit. And I just, the next point here, 24th of January, I'll just make a comment that the season we had, it was a cool start. It went cold. We had plants that were squaring quite high on the main stem for first square, like node 9, some varieties on position 11, or they put a squaring node on and then they skipped it and went vegetative and went back to squaring. We had a plant that was slow. It was small in structure. I think most people would agree there was not that many issues with big crops out there. And I think as a valley, we were just pushing and pushing and pushing to try and get some growth and play catch up, because we knew we were quite behind on day degrees. And then, just seeing it here, this number here on the 24th of January, I had my nodes above white flower still holding at 7, which is quite high for that time of year. And that was when around the 24th to the 26th, the crop I managed, majority of it got 2.5 litres of cutout picks applied to pull it back into line. And I think that's something that we've got to do is be willing to intervene and actively manage crops. We've got to be thinking when is the last effective square, and how can we manage our crop to that last effective square, and then also when is that last effective flower? Then is it somewhere between the 10th and the 15th of February? Well, if we know that we've got perhaps 2 nodes above white flower, we're going to drop each week after we cut a plant out. We can start to map forward that note above white flower decline so that we can manipulate the plant to finish flowering around the middle of February. And if we apply cutout picks and we're observing the crop and it doesn't seem to be happening quick enough, then we've got to come in with follow-up picks as well, just to maintain that growth and just pull that vegetative / reproductive balance back into line and encourage the crop to come in with the right maturity. So just a couple of slides now, just looking at case studies for a couple of fields I had. Just of the area I managed last year, we were fortunate we only had 2% low micronaire across the crop, and this field 15 was the field that actually accumulated most of that low micronaire cotton. It was watered up in good time, as you can see, and had a reasonably simple management program applied. The field was very slow to get going compared to other fields, and it was on a part of the farm that I'm now learning that can want to run on at the end of the season or take some stopping. And it had, as you can see, 2 lots of picks applied, quite heavy rates, 27th of January and the 4th of February. After that first application went on, I noticed that the terminal was still quite active and came in quite quickly with another 2 litres, and it took every bit of that to make that crop shut down. But as you can see, in the end, it was picked on the 18th of May. It averaged 10.6 bales a hectare, but the mic average for the field was 3.6. And you can see the discount falling into G4 and G3 micronaire range, which is not good. Comparatively, I just crossed to field 42, which was a 748 variety. And I suppose the point I want to make is there's not a whole lot significantly different. You know, a few days, 5 days earlier planting, that might be significant. But as far as picks management went, this field also got some variable rate picks on the 17th of January, and then it got the same program, the 2.5 litres, which was applied on the 24th of January, so a few days earlier again, and then the 2 litres following that. So this was a crop that really wanted to run on. It got to be about a metre at 10 in height in the end. But yeah, it just took a lot of management to control that last effective flower. In the end, it was picked the same time as the field before. Had a really good yield, but most importantly, the mic average was 3.9, and we were fortunate to only have 2 bales fall into that discount territory. And yeah, I suppose the point I'd make about the 2 fields is different management, not really. Just a little bit earlier planting date on the 748, a couple of days earlier on the first rate of cutout picks, and some variable rate picks as well, just helped to keep the maturity in check. So yeah, it just made for a better result. So just before we go to some questions, I just can't see them right at the moment with my slides up, but I'll just say yield can't always be made or caught up late season. And I think in the south we have to realise that sometimes there's going to be years where it just drops off at the end, and the date for making more yield is sooner than we would like. And so we've got to be willing to manage the crop as best we can up to that date, and then take what we can. It's not just something we can continue to flower and stack yield from there. I think also we need to evaluate our expectations on yield potential, and perhaps these can be assessed at first flower, just prior to cutout, and when we have, you know, last effective flower and coming in harvest. But there was talk about we were behind on day degrees, things like that. So we've got to be willing to, you know, manage our expectation and the crop accordingly. Managing crop maturity risk can involve sometimes, when we're doing cutout decisions, bringing in fields at different times. So we might want to grow a crop out because we really want to see what it can do, but it can mean we don't risk the whole crop. We go in on time with our cutout picks on our main fields, and we can grow a couple fields out. We don't spread the risk across the whole area, and likewise that's a variety function as well. And the other point I'd make there is emotion can definitely affect our decisions at time of cutout. It's a bit like managing short water and the battle between the head and the heart. And I think we really need to look at the science and the maths of the crop and manage that node above white flower decline in relation to the last effective flower. And if the crop is wanting to run on, we've got to come in and actively manage the season and the plant growth. So I'll just stop sharing there, and there's some comments there from Jorian. Obviously, 606 is still a full season variety, similar to 714. So thank you for that, Jorian. If there's no other questions or comments, that's all I had for my presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for coming online and attending tonight. This will be posted on our website later, so you can view it or share it if need be. And there'll be a feedback or a survey come to your inbox or after this session closes. So if you can complete that, that would be greatly appreciated. And thank you very much for attending tonight.